assessment and talking about becoming word nerds and using some of those funny research and evaluation language that we often do when we're talking about needs assessments, but also with Amy Al-Hadi this week, how to turn that around, where we also talk about community assets and we talk about having access in the community. So it's been a great week, and I am thrilled to have Becky Nesbitt here with us. I had gotten in touch with David Civittolo, and I said, look, we need somebody who's really grounded in this community development work to kind of put the icing on the cake for us this week. And so Becky agreed to do that, and she can tell you a little bit about her work in community development as she gets started. But thank you, Becky, so much for being here. So we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for asking. Shall I go ahead and begin sharing my screen?
Absolutely.
All right. As I mentioned, I'm going to turn my video off temporarily just because we're having a bit of a storm here. All right. Can you see my slides? Okay, very good. So as Teresa said, I'm Becky Nesbitt, and I work in community development with the focus on organizational development. So that includes processes like strategic planning, facilitation, and strategic foresight. And many of these processes include a needs assessment component. And my colleague, David Civittolo, who's the Assistant Director for Community Development, will also be joining us shortly. So there are as many ways to conduct a needs assessment as there are needs assessment. And today I want to share a few examples of what a needs assessment might look like, as well as the methods used in these examples to help the people in the organizations or the communities or the teams or the groups to embark on a mission of discovery. Now, I love words, and so mission of discovery sounds kind of poetic when talking about data collection and analysis. But a needs assessment is essentially a process that helps folks learn about the needs and the gaps in their communities and to recognize the assets and the strengths that they can employ to fill those gaps that can help them innovate and can help them improve their situation. So all of the examples that I'm going to be sharing today are available in the box file at the go.edu link on the screen.
I put it in the chat box for you, Becky.
Thank you, Debbie. And Debbie's also going to be helping me with some of the responses that you guys have. As I told her earlier, it's really at the end of my ability to both do a slideshow and look at the chat box when I'm on Zoom. So if knowledge is power, then a needs assessment can give folks a strong resource to kind of craft a strategy to begin to make thoughtful decisions for positive change. Now, I like to collect quotes, and this is one of my favorites. There is a difference in not knowing and not knowing yet. So in a way, I feel like this speaks to the essence of our work in Extension. Discovering through research and scholarship what we don't yet know, and then sharing that with our clientele. So today we'll be sharing 5 examples of needs assessment reports, and for each one, I will share with you the goal of the study as well as some of the techniques that were employed. And then if you would, while we're sharing each one, just put your thoughts or questions in the chat, and I'll pause for a couple minutes after each example, and Debbie will help share those with me. So let's begin. So this is a community health assessment that was conducted in Highland County in 2016. Now this is probably the most traditional example that I'm going to share today. So under the Affordable Care Act, health departments and 50C3 hospitals were mandated to conduct a needs assessment like every 4 or 5 years. And that needs assessment was designed to help inform a strategic plan. So the Highland County Community Action Agency, which was the funder of this project, put together a community health coalition and hired us to conduct a community health assessment for them. Our charge was to put together a process that would identify some of the health service gaps and use the existing health and community data to kind of paint a picture of the current health and wellness status of Highland residents. They also plan to use the process to build a stronger collaboration and partnership among the healthcare providers in the county so they could identify some of the shared health-related priorities that they had. So some of the techniques that we used for this project included 2 surveys. One was for residents and the other one was for healthcare providers. We also hosted multiple focus group interviews with different clientele like healthcare providers, parents, WIC recipients, etc. In the report is also included many sources of secondary data. So we pulled together some general demographic and economic statistics from the sources, like information from the census and from Jobs and Family Services. I think Brian shared a lot of this, the resources of the secondary data earlier in the week. And we also looked at some health specific data from places like the County Health Rankings, which is a national resource, the CDC, and health data through the Appalachian Data Portal, because Highland County is one of Ohio's Appalachian counties. And so this process from beginning to the delivery of the report took about 7 months. And this, by the way, was the second time we did this needs assessment for them. We did it the first time that it was required in 2012. And so the neat thing is that we were able to gather some data. We asked the same questions, some of the same questions during both of those processes. And in the box file, you'll find an infographic that we created that combines this 2012 data with some of the data that we collected in 2016. So I wanted to share a couple of things to just keep in mind when putting together a needs assessment. These are lessons that I kind of learned the hard way. So I had conducted some things, and then after the fact, I thought, oh man, I wish I had really thought about this in advance. I would have included a different question on the survey, or I would have asked for a different group during the focus group interviews. So I wanted to share some of these things with you. These are just some of the lessons learned that I think folks run into when you're first thinking about putting together a community needs assessment. So it's important to kind of carefully plan the elements that'll be used. For instance, this is a graph from the Highland Health Study comparing the 2 groups that were surveyed, the general public and the health professionals, as I mentioned earlier. And the green lines on the graph represent how the general public respondents perceive their own health status, so from poor to excellent. And that's compared with the responses reported by the health professionals, which is in orange, how they perceive the health of residents in Highland County. Now, this kind of information is kind of a place to start a conversation that may inform action, kind of like educational programs. So in the planning process, it's good to consider and discuss what might be interesting or important to compare or to learn more about. So in this case, we wanted to be sure to ask some of the same questions to both of the groups on the survey. And if you're using separate collection methods, or if you're using skip logic in surveys, of course you have to plan this stuff in advance. Now, this is another way that planning can have benefits in the process. It can help to paint the picture by citing secondary data that may sort of casually relate to the data that's collected as part of the needs assessment. So I'm not saying that these 2 data sets have a statistical relationship, not at all. I mean, in the surveys, we don't have enough controls to be able to say that. But at the same time, this can be a good springboard for future conversation and conversation among community groups. I mean, at the end of the day, that's why people do needs assessments. They want to find out how they can improve whatever their situation is, whether it's a community or their organization or a team that they're working on. So if possible, it's good to become familiar with the secondary data before developing your data collection methods. And sometimes we do that at the end. We collect all the data and then we think, well, let's pull out this secondary data to kind of help emphasize what we want to focus on. But it's really better if you kind of look at that ahead of time. It allows you to ask some questions to be able to dig deeper into these comparisons. So in this case, the chart shows the percent of cancer cases by stage at diagnosis for the leading and screenable cancers in Highland County and in Ohio and in the United States for 2014. We asked questions about many of these cancers in the survey, so the bar chart illustrates one of these questions and shows the time between cervical screenings for females, and we've organized that according to age, and that, of course, is just for Highland County. So again, this data, while it may not have a statistical relationship, it might reveal some behavioral or educational implications for action among the community leaders. So are there any questions about the, or thoughts or comments about the Highland study before we move on to the next example?
Again, you can either unmute your microphone and ask Becky, or you can type something in the chat window.
So I'll go ahead and move on, and then we can circle back to this one if you think of something. Sometimes a community needs assessment is used to address a more focused issue. So in this example, some young professionals in Darke County noticed that some of their colleagues in their cohort, so people their same age group, worked in the county, but they lived in neighboring counties, and they wanted to know why those folks chose not to live in Darke County. So these young leaders contacted Nancy Bowen, who's an extension field specialist, to help them dig deeper into this issue. After talking with Nancy and the team, these were some of the questions that they determined they wanted to explore. How can the county attract and retain young professionals? And if those professionals are choosing not to live in the county because of lifestyle concerns, what are those amenity gaps, for instance, that perhaps could be addressed? And finally, how have other similar communities employed techniques and maybe some best practices that have helped them attract both young workers and young residents to their community? So the project began with a survey that was distributed to Darke County employees through outlets like the Chamber. Local businesses sent it out to their employees. Industry also did the same thing, and then other employee outlets that were in the county. And once the survey results were analyzed and shared, the group put together some focus groups from 3 of the major employers in the county, which included a couple of manufacturing plants and the community healthcare facility. And the focus group participants consisted of young professionals working in those particular businesses. And the questions that the focus groups were asked allowed the research team to pull out some more of the detailed responses to some of the issues that were revealed in the survey results. So for instance, the participants discussed specifically why they chose to live where they do. And the team put together a profile of the county using a variety of sources of secondary data to create a snapshot of the demographic and the economic characteristics within their community. And then finally, case studies from similar communities were also shared. These are the case studies that were shared. A Delaware Historic Preservation Downtown Redevelopment Study, the Hancock Economic Development and Infrastructure Improvement Study, a look into the Hardin County Agency Collaboration, Wayne County Downtown Development, Auglaize County Workforce Development Study, and then finally a study in Sandusky of the Boomerang Young Professional Leadership. So the information that was gathered from the survey and the focus groups, as well as the snapshot that was created through those studies that I just mentioned, gave the young professionals kind of a broad view of their community. They could use the information that had been collected, look at the case studies, and see how other communities look, and then maybe what some successful practices those other communities have put into place to address some of the needs that they see in their own community in Darke County. So any thoughts or questions before we move on from this one? The next one is from a First Impressions program. And the First Impressions is a unique community program that's offered through Extension Community Development. It provides an opportunity for community leaders to discover how someone like a first-time visitor might perceive and experience their area. If you've ever been with if you've ever had like someone from your family visit you and it's the first time they visited you, or they're not that familiar with your area, and you put them in the car and you drive around and you start thinking about what things look like from their perspective, and you realize, wow, I drive by this every day and I never really noticed that rundown trailer that's right there. Or I never noticed how nice the signage is in this area. Well, that's what a First Impressions program can do. So this study was conducted by Myra Moss. She's an extension educator in CD. She's also the person that you should contact if you're interested in doing a First Impressions project in your own area. So basically how a First Impressions project works is that two communities of similar demographics are paired, and there has to be some distance between these communities, so they're not necessarily very familiar with each other. Then each community puts together a team, and they visit the other community to tour and report on their impression based on a number of criteria. Some of the elements they look at include the cleanliness of the community, the ease of traveling around the area, the availability of services, how friendly are the people there, physical appearance, those kinds of things. So the purpose of the program is to help community leaders assess their community and the impact of the efforts they put forth to be an attractive, welcoming area to folks like shoppers and tourists, businesses, potential employers. So this study in particular looks at looks at communities from Caldwell, Ohio, and New Martinsville, West Virginia. So as I said, the way a First Impression studies works is it's a bit different than a traditional needs assessment. Each team researches and reads about the other community before they visit it. So they might use Google to see what they can find out. They might get information from the chamber or the Convention and Visitors Bureau or other places like that that are available online. So they get kind of a general impression of the community, but they also report back on the kind of information that they learn from online sources or other sources that they have before they visit the community. Then the team completes a survey that has some standard questions as well as some site-specific questions that are generated by the other community. Then the team, each team visits the other community, and during their visit they take note of things like the appearance of the community as you're entering it, the signage, the road conditions, the general appearance, the availability of amenities like restaurants or public restrooms, shopping options, historic or cultural options, the business areas, those kinds of things. Each team photographs the area, and then they also interact with people in the community to just get a kind of a feel of what it's like to move around in that community and to visit that community. Maybe what folks think about the community in general, the folks who live and work there. And then after their visit, on the way home, they complete a post-visit survey while it's still fresh in their minds. And once they have compiled all of the information that they've collected, they share that in a report with Myra and her team, and then she puts all of that together, including both of the communities, into a report. And then what often happens is that each of those teams will visit the other community to share their experiences. And then that way, not only do they get the written report, but then there's that sort of dynamic that comes from the dialogue of sharing that report in person and then being able to answer some questions, etc. So this is just kind of a unique, a different way of conducting a bit of a needs assessment for a community. So any thoughts or questions about this particular project or technique?
Becky, I'm glad you highlighted this project, and I put a note in the chat box because we hadn't talked about it this week in terms of using photographs as part of a qualitative research project, but that's often the case, I know, in community planning, community development, but can be used in other areas as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I never really thought of using photographs for other projects other than first impressions, but I think that's actually a really good idea. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts before we move on? So I have two other projects that I want to share with you, and this one is the One Wooster Project. So historically, the Wooster campus has functioned as kind of two different campuses under OSU's College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, CFAES, of course. One side of the Wooster campus is the Ohio Agricultural Research and Development Center, OARDC, and that's focused on faculty research and graduate students, basically based in departments. And then the other part of the campus there is the Agricultural Technical Institute, ATI, and that side is focused on educating undergraduate students. So the university in general has adopted the idea of 6 campuses, 1 university. You've probably heard that in a lot of the information that's been shared by President Drake over the last few years. So following that lead, the directors of both OARDC and ATI began to ask what a unified campus concept for Wooster might look like. Could these entities be viewed as one campus referred to CFAES Wooster? So their vision for the project was to physically create one campus concept that functions as a single entity for faculty, staff, students, and even the public. So the Wooster campus partnered with my colleagues in community development to develop a process to create a plan that would address kind of the future development of university-owned lands in Wooster and create a vision that would focus on a 3-campus, 1-college concept. And by the way, so the 2 campuses that I mentioned are OARDC and ATI. The 3rd campus in that 3-campus concept is Extension in all of the 88 counties. So as you can see on the slide there, the team used a variety of data collection methods to achieve their goal. Using the first impression model, like we discussed earlier, the group conducted a driving and walking tour of the campus. They also employed 2 independent observers, visitors, who came to the campus and shared their impressions and experience while moving around and also interacting with folks on the campus, just like the First Impressions program. The team also explored some case studies. There were 5 of these of similar campus unification projects. And the case studies that they looked at were from the universities of Kansas and Wisconsin, the Schreiner University, Washington State University, and one from the Santa Ana College. All of these different entities also were in the process or had created a unified campus concept, much like what they were exploring in Wooster. So the team also conducted several focus groups with stakeholders like students, faculty, and staff. And finally, as many needs assessments contain, the research team also included recommendations for action. So this example includes some of the traditional needs assessment elements like have been discussed all week, focus group interviews, case studies, but it also includes some more creative, non-traditional elements like the first impression visits and reports. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these reports can be found in the box link that has been provided. So any thoughts or questions about this one? And then the last one that I want to share with you is one that if you've been in extension for longer than 5 years, you probably participated in at least one of the projects that were a part of this project. This study was basically inspired by the extension system, not just Ohio, but the entire extension system's centennial celebration, which I think was in 2015. So the person that was then the dean of our college, Bruce McFerrin, asked what extension in our state can do to remain relevant and innovative for the next 100 years. So he put together a research team, and he asked the folks in that team to perhaps begin working with some futurists, since we're looking at the next 100 years, to explore a couple of questions. And the futurists are the ones who told us, really, you don't want to look much beyond the next 20 years. So the key questions were, what will be the most challenging trends and issues for Ohioans by the year 2035? And what may be the best opportunities to leverage the strengths of the university and extension to address those issues? The study team launched a comprehensive 2-year process that included a variety of user groups and several data collection methods. So I've listed some of those methods here on the screen. As you can see, there were several. Over the course of those 2 years, the team employed several strategies to basically look at those principal questions. These are some of the methods, included surveys, multiple surveys, in fact, also multiple focus group interviews, not just asking the same question, but throughout those 2 years, asking a variety of questions. The focus group interviews allowed the team to dive deeper into information that they were collecting from some of these other sources. And that's what's really nice about using a focus group interview or listening sessions, is that sometimes you get feedback from a survey or from another way of collecting data, and it raises a lot of questions. You want to know more. And so that's the opportunity that you have through meeting face-to-face and some of those dynamic conversations that can come from those particular kinds of methods. There were also stakeholder forums where we brought together some of the stakeholders for our college to discuss and kind of reflect on some relevant topics. And then we also used a wide variety of secondary data that informed the trend reports, the trend data that is an essential part of a futuring or a strategic foresight project. So there's a lot of detail shared in the report. There's also an infographic that you'll find in the box that is really an overview, both a pictorial overview. So there's some really fun graphics that we put together. We had the opportunity to work with a graphic designer, which is always fun for me. And then it also has some details of the project, as well as the larger report. You'll find all that in the box folder. So let me move to my last slide, and then we can take any questions that you have about the Vice President's conversation or anything else that we've discussed today. So one of the aspects of extension life, of my extension career, that I have really enjoyed is the spirit of of lifelong learning that we embrace, not only as a guiding principle that impacts our approach to our educational and outreach and engagement efforts, but that's also a sentiment that applies to my own knowledge and understanding. So as I've mentioned many times, in almost every project that I am involved with, I learn something new and something useful. And I think that reflecting on and sharing those lessons learned helps to contribute to our educational process. So as I mentioned when I began, ultimately, I think a needs assessment identifies, of course, needs, but as Amy shared yesterday, it should also highlight the assets of a community or an organization. And armed with both the knowledge of the needs and of the assets that that organization or community have, people can make informed decisions about what is most important to them. So I'm open now to any thoughts or additional questions you might have. Don't everybody rush in there at once. So I see David is also on our Zoom now. So David, you want to pop in and share thoughts that you have?
Sure. No, thank you, Becky. Thank you for presenting the information on the 4 or 5 different needs assessments. I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you putting the PowerPoint together, and hopefully you gave everyone today, I think that it said 46 or 47 participants, a pretty good understanding of the breadth and depth of what OSU Extension Community Development can provide for, as we define communities, however we define communities, whether it's a political subdivision or a college or communities within, we have the ability to really listen to our clientele and to develop the needs assessment that will hopefully enhance their quality of life moving forward. And I think these examples just showed the depth and breadth of what we can provide. But did I see a question in the chat box?
Yes, do we have written guides on conducting the needs assessment programs, and are there links to the reports? Yes, the box file link that was shared at the beginning of at the top of the chat there includes links to, thank you, Debbie, she put it back there for us again, has links to all of the reports. And in terms of a written guide on conducting the needs assessment, I know, so for the First Impressions program, for instance, they would provide folks who are interested in going through that process as a guide. Do we have other formalized guides or information that you know of, David, that can help guide folks in this process? Or Debbie or Amy or anyone else from the LOD unit?
Again, I think this speaks to the uniqueness of community development in terms of the programs that we've developed, i.e. the First Impressions programs or the work that you did with the Vice President's panel. I think it goes to our responsiveness. We like to meet with our clientele, and before we put a standard template out, we want to hear what their needs are and how we best can access our resources to create a proposal that will really utilize their resources and help them create an assessment and as a powerful tool that they can use for their, again, loosely defined community, whatever that may be.
And during this week, we have shared, Amy has shared a few different resources on how to do different types of community assessments. But as David just said, they're very unique, like to the project. So we can provide resources and support, but it would take a partnership to develop an actual plan on the project and how it would evolve.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Debbie. And the other thing I would encourage you is when you take a look at these 5 different examples that we put together, that Becky put together, you'll understand the uniqueness. And many of these needs assessments were really developed based on the strength of the community development educator, and listen to what the needs were, and then using their strengths or tapping into the other resources of community development to kind of finalize the assessment. For example, when we did the work at OSU Wooster, you know, there's two campuses up on the Worcester campus. There's the ATI campus dealing with freshmen and sophomores, and then there is the research, the OERDC side of campus. And really those two didn't speak common language, even though we were all working with Ohio State. So again, putting a needs assessment together for that is a little bit different than working in a community or working for two communities to try to develop a first impressions program. We recognize, based on the assets of the community development educators, what in fact we have, and then we best try to meet the needs of the community. I mean, I think that's critical. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we've got 88 educators in 88 counties, because we don't. But what we do have is high-level CD educators who recognize their expertise as it relates around needs assessments or community economics. And from that, we work really closely with the clientele, so we don't provide a generic template. We really try to make sure that they get something specific towards their needs.
Yeah, kind of like extension in general. I bet that the extension program looks different in all 88 counties because, as you said, David, it's based on the people who live in the county, the stakeholders that are involved, and the staff and faculty that are involved in putting all of that together.
So did we ask Becky, or are there folks there that have done needs assessments, or they're interested in doing needs assessments? Have we talked about that? I'm sorry, I jumped on a little bit late.
No, it's a good question.
It's a quiet group, Becky. Anybody have any?
You want to do a show of hands of how many people are about to do a needs assessment or interested in doing a needs assessment?
Yes, great idea.
So at least I see at least one hand up. There's another one, two.
Yeah, two. Okay, good. Good.
Well, before we finish up today, I just want to take a moment to thank Teresa and Debbie and Amy and Brian and Jared for all the work that they did in putting this series together. I participated in all of them, and I learned probably a half a dozen new things on each day, literally. It was a terrific presentation. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the whole series, go back and check those out. Very, very informative.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the LOD team putting this together over these past couple of weeks. And I think they have surveys next week. What's next week, Debbie? I forget. I know I saw it. Or Jared? Or nobody remembers.
Next week, I don't want to jump in with the wrong information. So Debbie's, next week is reporting and evaluation.
Actually, it's just evaluation, Amy.
Okay.
So it's an evaluation boot camp. We're going to have the day one is kind of an overview, the importance of evaluation. 2 and 3, Brian Butler and I are going to dig a little bit deeper into how to use Qualtrics. On day 4, we're going to have some people come from around the state and educators from around the state to talk about different evaluation projects they've been involved with. And then on Friday, we're going to have Brian Raisin talk about a little bit about storytelling and how to make your data talk and show impact. And we'll probably have some examples to share too.
Brian, the storyteller, I like that. I have to remember that, Becky, next time we see him. He can tell us a story.
He can. He's a good storyteller for sure.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to add one thing, Becky, as you mentioned, the use of pictures for qualitative. I do remember a project at OSU that used Photovoice, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's Dan Rumley from FCS. He did use Photovoice. I attended his presentation, and I still like remember that presentation from about 5 years ago in the annual conference. But I think they used pictures where they used either youth or community members. For example, the question will be take pictures of places you would use for grocery shopping. That's just an example of a question. And then they will send people out, take pictures, and then they will come back with their pictures and they talk about the pictures and so on. But I'm not sure about the project. It's a presentation I attended, and I've always been interested in learning Photovoice. Seems like it's a useful method for collecting data, or a useful technique. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a fun and engaging way to get people involved in the project.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
That's neat. Well, that's everything that I have. So thank you guys again for tuning in today.